This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This year, we've spent a lot of time on this show trying to parse out together how the massive shifts in federal policy under the second Trump administration will affect our region. Later this hour, we'll be diving into the solar industry and how the end of a federal income tax credit and grant funding for states are both changing the game for solar installers and their customers in Vermont. But first, if you have been reading your local paper or Vermont Reddit or your front porch forum in the past week, I bet that you have heard about a 4-day trip that a group of Vermont state representatives took to Israel last week. Maybe you've publicly voiced your opinion on this trip yourself. 5 representatives from the Vermont House went on this trip, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. They were part of a much larger group of 250 lawmakers from all 50 states who attended a conference called 50 States, One Israel. It was organized by Israel's foreign ministry. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave the keynote address. Last week, around the same time as this trip was happening, the United Nations Human Rights Council concluded that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Israel's foreign minister called that UN report distorted and false. Now, we invited all 5 Vermont lawmakers who went on this trip onto the show today. We heard back first from the 2 Republicans who went, Representatives James Gregoire of Fairfield and Gina Galfetti of Barrytown, and they are with us now. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us on today. It's very important that we're here. Thank you.
Yeah. I also want to share why you're the 2 that are joining us. Matt Birong was unable to join due to his schedule, and he also declined a recent interview request from a Vermont Public reporter citing safety concerns after the trip. Will Greer of North Bennington and Sarita Austin of Colchester did make themselves available for today's show, but that was after our 2 guests responded to us. Greer and Austin both have shared statements about the trip that I'll be excerpting during this conversation, and you can read Representative Greer's statement in full on his Instagram. We also received many emails ahead of today's show from you, our listeners, and some of them you're going to hear excerpted today, and all of them informed the questions that I'll be asking of our guests. And the first question is a very straightforward one. Why did you want to go on this trip? Representative Gregoire, we'll start with you.
I think it's important to learn. We can sit at home, on any issue, by the way, and we can just listen to the media. We can listen to our neighbors. Not that those don't have value. Or we can go and do the research ourselves. We can, in this case, go over there and see for ourselves. Now, is it a curated trip? Certainly. But the beauty of most legislators is that we're intelligent enough to be able to discern what is, that curation, and being able to ask our own questions, make our own judgments, being able to talk to regular people that aren't part of the tour and getting their points of view to get a much more well-rounded understanding of what's going on over there from their perspective, the regular person's perspective, but also to be in the room when the questions are asked of the leadership. We didn't get to ask every leader. We did have a big question and answer with the president. We knew that we probably wouldn't get questions and answers with everybody, but to be able to be in the room to have the opportunity to ask the questions that the very people who are attacking us would want asked, and in fact were asked by many American legislators. So that was important to me.
And Representative Galfetti?
Yeah, I'd like to mirror a lot of the things that James just said, and I'll add that I thought that it was important with 49 other states being represented at this event to go and take part and not just understand what the trip was going to be represented to us by the Israeli government, how it was going to be represented to us by the Israeli government, but I also wanted to connect with legislators from across the country and see what their perspectives were on the current conflict and the ongoing genocide in Israel, in Gaza, and what their takeaways were and what their opinions were. And I certainly wouldn't have gotten that opportunity if I had stayed home. When I was speaking to Joe Krawinski, the Speaker of the House, before I went, she told me that it was important that I go there and ask the difficult questions. And if I hadn't gone on this trip, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. And in the context of the trip, it's not as if we were sequestered and prevented from talking to the average person along the trip. People in restaurants, people in, you know, open places and throughout these historical sites and the sites that we were taken to, we were, encouraged to talk to people on the street. So I think that's a valuable perspective that I never would have been able to get if I hadn't gone on the trip.
Yeah. Some of the critiques that we received in our inbox about your decisions to go on this trip seem to whittle down to this question about like what is the role of a state legislator, a member of Vermont's House. This trip is different than a trip to Canada, for example, which we share a border with, and many families share cross border ties, cross border businesses. And I wonder, is the war in Gaza and Israel, is it a key issue for your constituents? Is this something that you're hearing about from them often? Did that inform part of the reason why you went? And Representative Galfetti, I'll ask you that one first.
Absolutely. I've heard a lot of feedback and questioning and commentary from folks within the Palestinian community and from folks within the Israeli and the broader Jewish community regarding this issue. So I thought it was ultimately far more important that I go as their Vermont legislator to represent them and to listen with my own ears and look with my own eyes at what was being represented to us by the Israeli government and to make their voices heard on a larger stage.
And Representative Gregoire?
Yeah, I mean, we have different districts, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't hear a lot about like what is Vermont legislature going to do about this. In fact, I find most people are very pragmatic and understand that as a legislature, we're not Congress. That's true, but is it one of the hot button topics of the times? Yes, it is. Are people talking about it all the time? Quite a few are. Do As a person like myself, I'm like, I used to have students say like, Mr. G, why don't you ever believe us? I'm like, well, it's not because you're lying to me. It's because the things that you're hearing aren't necessarily true. So I'm a person that goes, okay, we're talking about this. We're having this dialogue. But what's one more opportunity to try to find out a different perspective? And you can bring that perspective back to those conversations. So is it that, Vermont's going to suddenly stop a war? No. But does it better inform any of us to have better conversations about how we deal with, a congressional delegation, or how we can help people understand what's going on there versus, well, Johnny down the road told me. Well, James down the road was there. And James doesn't make any bones to think that he was in Gaza. We are well aware of that. We're smart people. We know we saw one side. But what we saw, especially on the border regions, was still illustrative, and it still told us a heck of a picture that we can extrapolate out and say, if these people are going through this, what's it like on the other side of the border? But it gives you a little bit more perspective, and having that for these conversations is important.
So you just mentioned that you were only in Israel, not in Gaza or in the West Bank. We got a question about that from a listener named Susan. Now, before I read your question, I just want to share a little bit of your itinerary in Israel. There was a tree planting ceremony in a city that was attacked by Hamas on October 7th, 2023. You all visited the Holocaust Remembrance Center, Yad Vashem, and spent time with the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, among many other events and activities. Now, this listener named Susan emailed us and asked this: why didn't you go to Gaza or anywhere in the West Bank to see what is happening there in real time? And I would add on, did you consider going to that area? And if not, why not? Representative Gregoire, excuse me, since you just brought this up, I'll ask you first.
I would tell you that Gina and I would go to either one if we were invited. We were not allowed to go there, and it's not because Israel's like, oh, you
Gaza,
can't
but we
cross the
were
border. I'm
invited to
sure
the West
there
Bank.
probably is that aspect, but we wouldn't be safe there. Hamas, unlike Israel, who treats everybody inside their borders with respect, and it's nothing to discount what's going on in Gaza. If a group of Americans rolled into Gaza, you think that we'd be safe for more than 5 minutes? I'm pretty sure not. But we still would have went if they would agree to let us see firsthand. I would have went because that's how
Representative
you learn.
Galfetti?
Yeah, that's not entirely true. We actually didn't we, James? Wasn't that luncheon in the West Bank?
No, that was in Samaria.
It was in Samaria, but it was very close to the West
I think
Bank, and it was
I believe that area
True.
is
certainly,
close to the border, but
Yes,
not
yeah.
it's close.
technically
It's
in the
close.
West
It's
Yeah.
very
Bank.
close. And
Um,
disputed land. Yes.
in not in land that was in an active state of war. It was quite peaceful there, and we were able to speak to a Palestinian person who had been, persecuted by the Hamas government and decided that he was more in line with what was going on in the Israeli mindset as far as them wanting to see a peaceful resolution of this conflict. So I think that we did get as full of a view as you could get without being allowed to go to Gaza, which, as James mentioned, there's inherent security risk with being able to go there at this time. Although I'd welcome the opportunity to be able to go and visit Gaza directly when this conflict ends, which it needs to end immediately. And I think that, we're both open to those sorts of perspectives and investigations as well.
And what you both have said that you weren't allowed to go to Gaza. Was that under the parameters of this specific trip? I'm not aware of travel restrictions on Americans to Gaza at
Well,
this
I,
time.
I think allowed is probably not the correct word to
Right.
use. The safety of going to Gaza right now is certainly in question.
Right.
And I certainly am not willing to take the risk of going to a country where genocide is being committed to see that firsthand. We had enough security risks as there were. Just when we were flying out, we were in the basement of the airport because of a missile alert. There was a Houthi missile and a Houthi drone that were shot down just before we departed the country. So, beyond risking my life, I was not able to delve any further into that.
Yeah. You brought up the word genocide. It's a difficult word on both sides, and it carries a lot of meaning in this conversation right now. Again, the UN Human Rights Council just declared what's going on in Gaza a genocide. Israel has strongly pushed back against that characterization. Representative Greer, who joined you on this trip, wrote in a statement, "By going to Israel, I was not going in support of Netanyahu's government and certainly not the genocide taking place in Israel, or excuse me, taking place in Gaza, nor the ground offensive that has taken place as well in the past week. It is clear that this war is being unnecessarily prolonged to keep Netanyahu in power." Representative Galfetti, you just called Israel's actions in Gaza a genocide, but you also attended a conference in which the leader of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu, gave a keynote address. And I believe that prompted a listener of ours named Aaron to write in with this question. Aaron writes, "What possible reason could there be to accept anything from the Israeli government at this time?" So I'm wondering what you're telling your constituents who feel the same as Aaron.
Well, I think it's important to separate the Israeli people from the Israeli government. Just recently, the protests, anti-war and pro-peace protests in Israel drew over 1 million supporters. That would be like having 30 million people show up at some sort of anti-government protest in the United States. So I think it's very important to remember that we can stay in support of the Israeli people while condemning the Netanyahu government. It's, abundantly clear to me that Netanyahu has a vested interest in continuing this war, and the Likud party and the Atzma Yedid party are supporting him along with the religious Zionist party to continue this war, but that does not translate into the entire nation of Israel. So I think we need to be very, very careful in condemning Israel as a country and very proactive in condemning Israel's current leadership in the Netanyahu administration.
Now, this trip was organized by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. They paid for the expenses of the trip for you all to go there. Representative Gregoire, would you say in response to our listener Aaron's question about questioning why you accepted something from the Israeli government at this time?
I would add on to Greer and Galfetti and say that first of all, not only are the people separate from the government, but the government itself is divided. And the other part we're going to go back to, and we're going to harp on it over and over. You're not going to hear or see things firsthand if you stay at home. None of us, at least none of us that I am aware of, are rich. If we're going to have an opportunity to go somewhere and learn about an issue that's a hot button issue all across our country, then you're going to take the opportunities you're given. That doesn't mean you're supportive of everything that they do. It was clear that there's plenty of people involved don't support everything that's going on. It's a mixed bag. But the people of Israel, we wanted to talk to them. Yes, we wanted to be in the rooms with these dignitaries. Do you think if I went or Gina went on our own to Israel, that we were going to meet with the president and have an opportunity to ask him questions, the questions that the same people who are attacking us would want asked? We would not be anywhere near the president. So you have to step back and use your pragmatism and your intelligence and say, how am I going to be able to get in places to be able to do the things that people would want us to do? Ask those tough questions. That's the only way it's going to happen.
I also want to add here, we had brought up the possibility of travel restrictions on Americans to either Israel or Gaza. The U.S. State Department has a travel advisory as of mid-July as a do not travel area. It's also asking travelers in the United States to reconsider travel to Israel due to terrorism and civil unrest, and the West Bank due to terrorism and civil unrest. Those are words from the U.S. State Department. We received a number of questions from our listeners for both of you about legislation or policies in Vermont that you see as relevant to your trip. Representative Galfetti, you were one of the legislators to sponsor a bill in the last legislative session that would have broadened the state's definition of anti-Semitism and also expand education about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust in Vermont's school system. Three of your fellow trip attendees introduced that bill alongside you. Do you see that bill as one of your legislative priorities for this upcoming session?
That bill was about recognizing and responding to a real rise in anti-Semitism in Vermont schools. We've seen more of it, casual Hitler salutes in the hallways, swastikas carved into school property, and we need to make sure that Jewish students are protected. It adds an anti-Semitic harassment to the current definition of harassment, and people need to read that definition to really understand what the bill does. This bill does not exist in a vacuum, and unless you're reading corresponding statutes, you're not necessarily getting the full picture. And it also asks the Agency of Education to create a curriculum around the evolving nature of anti-Semitism. And, right now, Vermont's the only state in New England that doesn't have a required element of Holocaust education. And certainly after going to the Holocaust Memorial, I am struck by the fact that we're getting to a point where a lot of the Holocaust survivors are passing away. We've got relatively few people left that actually survived that event. And we're at a time where we really can't forget about that, especially in the face of the current genocide that's going on, that's perpetrated by the Netanyahu administration in Gaza.
And Representative Gregoire, are there policies or legislative proposals in Vermont that might come up during the next legislative session that feel relevant to your trip?
I would assume that that bill would come back up, and I would agree with Gina's categorization of that, that it was a response to rising anti-Semitism. And speaking of the Holocaust and the Holocaust Memorial, we already know, we didn't need to go there to find this out, that the rise of there's a massive rise in people who don't believe, or a Holocaust denial, basically. We also know that there is a rise in anti Semitism. So we can be very concerned about what's going on overseas, not just in Gaza. I mean, what's going on in a lot of other countries that are really bad. But right here in our own country, first of all, we have political violence. That's not sad. That's something we need to get control of. But speaking specifically of this issue, the rise of anti-Semitism over the last couple of years, including our own students here in Vermont, but looking at higher ed, where Jewish students were kept off campus or beaten and otherwise by people who claim to want peace. You can't have it both ways. We need to have this education and this understanding that you can feel very passionate about something that's going on, for example, in Gaza, and think it's completely wrong, because it is. But it doesn't mean you should turn around and do the same kind of things, obviously on a macro scale, if you will. It's not like shooting or being bombed like in Gaza.
Hmm.
But you can't turn around and do that to Jewish students or your Jewish community members. So like two wrongs don't make a right, and one of them's closer to home. So, and what other bills come up, I don't know yet. I mean, it's still midsummer, late summer, but we'll be looking.
I want to share a segment of the statement that Sarita Austin of Colchester wrote to Vermont Public. She writes, and I'm quoting here, "I realized this was an opportunity to learn, listen, ask questions, and gain understanding about Israel as the only democracy in the Mideast, as well as have access to meet and converse with Israelis." She also noted that there's a group called Startup Nation Central that connects Israeli entrepreneurs with global markets, investors, and partners, and said that she thought about how emerging Vermont companies might be able to work with that group. Now, we have to wrap up in just a moment here, so I'll ask that you both keep your answers to this, if possible, to one word. It's been reported on this trip that Israeli leaders encouraged the lawmakers there to support legislation in their home states that would target the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which essentially aims to end international support for Israel. Do you plan to support any such legislation or introduce it yourself in the next legislative session, Representative Gregoire?
No, and I don't recall it being asked.
Representative Galfetti?
Same. I don't recall that being asked. And I certainly think that once again, you have to separate the people of Israel, the economy of Israel, the developments in Israel from the Netanyahu government. There's just no putting the two of them together anymore.
Gina Galfetti of Barrie and James Gregoire of Fairfield are both Vermont state representatives. I really appreciate you both taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Coming up on Vermont Edition, the state's solar industry is rushing to finish jobs before federal tax incentives for solar expire at the end of the year. If you've been thinking about solar for your home or your business, you're going to want to stick around for this one. This is Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Just a few days ago, on Sunday, environmental activists organized a national day of action celebrating the power we can generate from the sun. There were events all over the country and our region, including a pizza party at a solar-powered tiny house in Chester. A big goal of the day was to highlight that solar power is cheaper now than the cost of fossil fuels. They called it Sunday. The environmental leader Bill McKibben of Ripton was one of the key organizers, and he talked about Sunday to us on Vermont Edition in August.
95% of the new electric generating capacity added around the world in the last year came from sun and wind. It's happening because sometime in the last 5 years or so, we crossed an invisible line where this became cheaper way to produce power than burning coal or gas or oil.
Now, the community level celebrations of Sunday stand in pretty stark contrast to the federal government's national policies around solar. A long-standing federal income tax credit for residential solar panels is going to disappear at the end of the year. those incentives going away jeopardizes the solar industry here. Kevin McCallum has been following this story for 7 days, where he's a reporter. Kevin, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Michaela.
We also have Jared Cobb with us. He is the general manager of Catamount Solar, which is a solar installation company based in Randolph. Jared, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, Kevin, tell us more about these changes to the federal tax credits that affect solar projects here in Vermont.
Sure. Well, it's starting to look like Trump's attack on renewable energy in the case of solar is backfiring, certainly in Vermont in the short term, because what it has done is, as you say, this 30% federal income tax credit is going away at the end of the year. And so it's causing anyone who was really on the fence and considering going solar, putting solar on the roof of their home, to pick up the phone and to call an installer in Vermont to see if there's any way they can get that project moving forward and installed by the end of the year so that they still qualify for that income tax credit. And so solar installers in Vermont are just having boom times right now. You couldn't even get a solar installer to put something on your roof by the end of the year probably at this point, because so many people have reached out to installers and asked for these projects to be installed that they don't have the bandwidth. They've only got a finite number. It's a big industry in the state, but it's a finite industry. And so there's just a real challenge right now for installers to get all the work they have in front of them completed by the end of the year.
Yeah, and you write in your article that a homeowner who installs a $35,000 array can deduct $10,500 from their federal income tax bill.
That's right.
That's a lot.
That's right.
So, Jared, is that what your company's experiencing? Are you guys booked out?
Yeah, we were booked out before any of this tax credit business happened in Washington. Catamount Solar, we're based in Randolph. We're a worker-owned cooperative, and we've been growing the last few years as the rest of the solar industry has had some other headwinds. But we were booked, and then the tax credit business hit, and the phones were just ringing nonstop. So we're booking into next year, but it's definitely a different conversation with customers who don't have the access to the investment tax credit.
Yeah. And Kevin, how reliant is Vermont as a whole on solar?
Well, so Vermont actually has a pretty decent chunk. Don't remember the exact percentage, but of the energy that's generated in the state of Vermont, I think the number one is hydro, but then after that, it's solar. So it's a big piece of our energy portfolio, and it's only certain to grow going forward, given all the interest in solar at the moment and some other bigger projects that are coming online in the future.
Now, commercial installations, as I understand it, are still going to qualify for tax incentives at the federal level. Jared, could you see your company shifting in the future toward those types of projects?
Yes, and we live in Vermont, where we live here because we love the rolling green mountains and the wide open spaces. So the commercial solar business is just not as big or viable in Vermont as it is in some other states. So our commercial segment at Catamount Solar has been growing, and we're talking to people already about getting contracts in so that they can claim the 30% tax credit. We have a little bit of a longer runway until July of next year before that tax credit goes away. So yes, commercial is viable, and we still will have a vibrant residential solar and battery business. And like I said earlier, it's just, it's changed with the loss of the tax credit, and it's without the 30% tax credit customers, there just aren't as many customers who it's viable for. So it's going to get harder. And we at Catamount and other installers in the state are really asking the governor and the legislature to act and stop chipping away at the compensation that customers get for net metering.
Now, back to this difference between the installation at a private home versus a commercial installation. Kevin, you reported that there are some other workarounds in Vermont, like some companies can lease solar arrays to homeowners rather than selling them because they would still qualify for commercial installation
That's
in
right.
that way? Can you explain that a little more?
I'll try my best. It gets a little complicated, of course, but one of the strategies that I think some solar installers are considering is figuring out a way to lease the solar panels to the homeowner in a way that they don't actually buy the panel, and therefore the lack of the tax credit doesn't really mean anything for them. If they're just paying a set amount every month to lease the panels from the company, there's a large national company called Sunrun that uses this model, and it's actually become one of the largest installer of solar in the nation by doing it, because it's far lower upfront cost for a lot of homeowners. So there are some people who are thinking about switching their business model. I spoke to Mike McCarthy at Suncommon, which is the largest solar installer in the state, and he said, the industry could very well in Vermont look a little different next year in terms of the types of systems that they're selling to people.
Jared, before we let you get back to work, I know it's a busy time for you all. What would you say to listeners who might have been thinking about solar and installing a solar panel at their house and are reconsidering that right now? And any advice? I mean, if they're hearing from you that most companies are completely booked.
Right. Yeah. Give us a call. Let's talk about 2026. Solar is not going away. The price of power goes up from our utility companies every year, and that's just a fact. And solar allows folks to have predictable, reliable power bills. And we're going to be here. It's things are going to get different, but it still makes sense whether you're looking at it from an environmental perspective of cutting carbon pollution and solving the climate crisis, or whether you're looking at it of how do I manage my own power and not be relying on utility companies that charge me more every year.
Jared Cobb is the general manager of Catamount Solar, which is based in Randolph. I should also note that they are a Vermont public underwriter. Jared, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kayla. Have a good one.
And Kevin, you also reported that Vermont has been anticipating $62.5 million in grant money from a federal program called Solar for All. That's over now, too, right?
That's right. So the reason we wanted to dig into this industry right now is because we saw that it was facing not only the 30% federal tax cut, but it also is pulling back grant funding that is meant for solar. And one of them is this Solar for All grant that was $62 million for the state. The state was in the process of getting ready to start handing out that money. It was literally, it wasn't hypothetical. It was a real program with real money behind it. And the Trump administration and the EPA, led by Lee Zeldin, basically targeted that money all over the nation, not just Vermont, and said, that's a boondoggle. That is a waste of taxpayer money. We are going to claw that money back. And so it's fascinating that $62 million in solar can go a long way. And it was likely going to go to a lot of lower income apartment complexes, so that it was going to be lowering the bills for low income people. And so Bernie Sanders was livid about this, because this is a program he strongly supported, and to see that money clawed back by the federal government was quite upsetting. And there's a big push to sort of try to block it. And so I'm not sure if the state is going to be joining any of the lawsuits to try to get the money back. I would think that Charity Clark indicated that she is definitely interested in doing that.
Yeah, they're involved in so many
oh my
lawsuits
God,
already against the Trump administration.
She's suing them for everything. And so it makes total sense that we will eventually get to the point where Vermont joins a lawsuit to try to get that money reallocated to the state. But at the moment, she was not able to say that they're signing on to a lawsuit yet.
Well, we have to take a short break here. We're speaking with 7 Days reporter Kevin McCallum, who might be the first Vermont public guest to say the word boondoggle on air. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll keep the conversation going when we come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. This hour, we are discussing the impact of federal-level changes to tax policy and grant programs that could affect the solar industry here in Vermont. Our guest is Kevin McCallum, a reporter for 7 Days. And I want to add one more perspective here, too. Peter Sterling, the executive director of Renewable Energy Vermont. It's a trade association representing the clean energy industry. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, so what have you and your colleagues there at Renewable Energy Vermont been talking about in the last couple weeks and months as we get closer and closer to the sunsetting, no pun intended, I'm sorry, of these federal income tax credits?
Well, the first thing that jumps at us is the actions by Congress and the Trump administration are going to raise energy prices for regular people across the board by getting rid of the cheapest form of new renewables, which is wind and solar, and making them more expensive. You're also going to increase the price of natural gas, which in New England is the marginal source of fuel, which means when we need more energy, we go to natural gas in this region. We don't use coal, and by and large, we don't use oil. So when we need more power, we need natural gas. The price of natural gas is going to go up because of this bill. There'll be more competition for it. So this action will raise electric bills for Vermonters, and that is really a shame. The good news is we have a really adept and talented solar sector here in Vermont. They've done a lot of work right before this bill passed and in the weeks after to safe harbor a lot of equipment so they can get the full tax credit. So I think for the next couple of years, Vermont's actually in a pretty good shape as far as building solar power to meet our requirements, to meet our new demand, and to bring it on pretty cheaply. But as your previous guest, Jared, was saying, there will be an impact for a cost increase for Vermonters who want to go solar at home through the net metering program. And, we're going to need the legislature and the governor to step up and act if they really want Vermonters to go solar at home.
Kevin, I'm curious for the thoughts there, because if I remember correctly in your reporting, you noted that some solar companies are shifting their focus to work in other states like New York that are more supportive of the solar industry, making it a little cheaper to do business there.
That's right. And that trend has been underway for a while. That's not a new thing. Suncommon in particular has opened offices in surrounding states for that exact reason. I think it's entirely possible that we see solar companies in the state moving or at least shifting some of their work to other places, especially if what Peter just described does not happen, right? I mean, Peter is probably going to be in the legislature this year asking for particular changes to permitting rules and for net metering rules that would be more supportive of the solar industry to offset some of the federal challenges. And if that doesn't happen, if the lawmakers aren't supportive of that, or if the governor vetoes those actions and Vermont remains kind of without any real assistance or greater support for the solar industry, I think you definitely could see more solar companies shifting focus to other states.
I want to read a couple emails that we've gotten from listeners during this conversation. You can also share your thoughts by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Linda in Norwich writes, I just want to say that net metered solar has been very good for Vermont's grid. It avoids transmission losses and network upgrades, a smaller impact on the land, faster installation, and when paired with batteries, they play a significant role in resilience in the face of power outages. These distributed resources really help avoid our utilities having to buy really expensive power this summer. We also got a question from Fran in Weybridge, who attended Sun Day in Middlebury this past weekend. It says that they saw an example of a small portable plug-in solar panel that can be plugged in directly to an electric outlet in your home and reduce your electric bill substantially. Fran wants to know how soon we might be able to use these panels in Vermont. Kevin,
I went to a similar event in Montpelier just the other day where were people talking about these panels. They're basically they're solar panels that you can put on your balcony or your porch, and you can just plug it into an outlet, and it will offset the use in your home when the sun is shining. And if it doesn't come with a battery, then it won't work at night, of course. But they're often paired with batteries in a way that can help offset electricity usage. And there's some hurdles for that technology to gain broad adoption in the state. One is there's going to need to be some rule changes in the state. So lawmakers are going to have to get on board. They're going to have to allow these systems, which are not I think, currently allowed under state law. So if the law can get changed in a way that allows people to generate electricity in a way that they can just plug it right into their outlet and not have to hire an electrician and get permits and get a sign off from the Public Utility Commission, which is currently required for an actual solar array, then I think we could see more people deciding to go solar in this what's a far less expensive way. So it remains to be seen because it's not presently allowed and the law has to change first. But I think there's a lot of people with a lot of hope that could be something that renters and people, and others could avail themselves of.
Yeah, Peter, what do you think of these portable plug-in solar panels that our listener Fran brought up?
It has the chance to really expand the ability to access solar power to thousands and thousands of Vermonters who don't live in a home that is suitable for solar or who rent. And so that's incredible. And I got to say, a real important part about portable solar and all solar power, every time we use solar in Vermont, at some point we reduce our need for natural gas in a low-income or minority area in other parts of New England. Vermont needs natural gas when we're not using renewables. All 64 of the plants that supply New England with natural gas are based outside of Vermont, and again, in primarily low-income and minority areas. So anytime we're going solar, we're decreasing the impacts on the people who live near those plants, and that's super important.
Now, the folks who organized Sunday, this day of action around solar power that happened this past Sunday, they say that solar is now cheaper than fossil fuels. But still, when you're an individual, you're thinking about getting your house retrofitted with solar panels, or I don't know, maybe you want to buy an electric car, something like that. All of these things require an enormous upfront investment of tens of thousands of dollars. I wonder, Peter, if there are any technological advances happening right now that you're really hopeful about that could make solar projects cheaper?
Sure. But first, just to be clear, when we talk about solar power being cheaper than fossil, we're talking about new resources. So when we bring on a new solar array versus bringing on a new natural gas plant, that new solar array is definitely cheaper than building a new natural gas plant. The power from that is much cheaper. Same with wind. So that's really what we're talking about. But yes, the technology for solar is getting better all the time. Right now, actually the legislature wisely just passed a law that expanded the access to putting in more backyard solar. So right now you can put in a 25 kilowatt system in your backyard in the space that you used to be able to only do a 15 kilowatt system, which can kind of power your whole house for a lot of time. And it just shows that solar panels are getting more efficient so getting more energy out of less and less space. So things like that are happening all the time, which makes going solar more affordable.
Now, Kevin, amidst all of these changes that we're talking about this hour, Vermont regulators recently approved a massive solar project in Shaftesbury just last week. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. It was a challenging project for the regulators to decide what to do with, because it's a very large project. It's 80 acres, which is the size of 65 football fields, and it is just somewhat out of scale for most of the things in Shaftesbury. It's a very rural area. You don't see installations of anything of that magnitude, and so the neighbors surrounding it were very upset. Had a lot of questions, and they urged the regulators at the PUC to not approve it for a variety of reasons, including the amount of agricultural land that it would cover, the number of trees that would have to be cut down in order to install it. But the regulators at the PUC greenlit the project, and after years of analysis, and decided that the state of Vermont and the region, and the New England region, have such aggressive renewable energy goals that I don't want to say there wasn't a choice, but there was a strong incentive to allow the installation of a new large solar array. And there's more coming. This company has a couple other projects of similar and even larger scale in southern Vermont. And so I think we're going to see more of this in our future.
Now, will the energy it produces stay in Vermont?
So that was one of the controversies around the project, was that locals would say, hey, look, this is not even electricity that's going to be used in the state. It's just going to be sold to some out-of-state utility. The renewable energy credits for that power are going to go to a company in Connecticut. So all electrons, as I understand it, in the grid, it goes into the grid that serves Vermont. So the electrons will go to homes in Vermont.
Don't make me science.
Sorry, and I couldn't even go any deeper than that. But as I understand it, the operative question is whether there's a contract for that solar energy from a utility in Vermont. Is Green Mountain Power, for example, going to buy all that power? And I think the answer is no. I think a lot of the expectation is that the power from this large solar farm is almost certain to be sold out of state, and that was one of the concerns that residents raised, and it was one of the concerns that one of the regulators raised. I have to say that it's somewhat unusual for the three members of the Public Utilities Commission to be anything but unanimous on a project. And so to see one of them, Margaret Cheney, write what's essentially a dissenting opinion, even though it was called a concurring opinion. And she raised several concerns about the project, even as she was agreeing that it should happen. And she was kind of, I think, signaling that she's going to be hard pressed to approve projects of this size and scope in the future, specifically if it involved the removal of trees. This project was going to, I've been to this site and it's gorgeous. It's on a road called Holy Smoke Road, which apparently is named that because it's just the views are fabulous. And so it's pasture land, but in between the pastures, there's all these rows of very mature trees. And when you add up all the construction and all the disruption that's going to occur, the developers of the project, to maximize the amount of electricity that they're going to be able to get from the site, had to remove about 35 acres of mature trees. And that clearly concerned one of the commissioners. She said, look, there's other places in the state that we could probably site solar that are not going to be removing what are already carbon absorbing, entities. And say we already have trees removing carbon from the air. Why would we chop them down to install solar? So I think that's always been a challenge in the state. People have always chafed a little bit at the idea that you're going to cut down a tree to put solar. That doesn't make any sense. And so I think one of the commissioners is definitely signaling that that's how she feels as well.
Yeah, Peter, what are your thoughts on this Shaftesbury solar farm? I can imagine that Renewable Energy Vermont is pretty excited about it.
Anytime we're bringing solar online in Vermont is playing its part in combating climate change by decarbonizing New England's electric grid. And Kevin was right, the electrons from this project will flow to Vermonters. So when they turn on the lights or charge their car, they will be using the power, the electrons from Shaftesbury Solar, even if another utility can claim credit for them. I think we always have to be careful about siting. We have to do our due diligence. I think the PUC did its due diligence with this process, as did our state agencies like the Agriculture Department and the Public Service Department and Historic Preservation. They all looked at it, gave it the thumbs up, and it got permitted. But in general, Vermont needs to do its part to put up solar and wind resources and other renewable resources to make sure we're generating clean energy to meet growing demand, because we don't want to use it from coal, oil, or fossil fuels.
Yeah. Kevin, what's the timeline on this project?
I have not been able to get the developer on the horn. I reached out to them. They're a Connecticut company called Free Point Solar, yeah. And they have spoken to us in the past, but I think they knew this was kind of a hot topic and not a great time to talk about it. I know that there are other projects that they are pushing in the state. One is in Panton. And I was surprised to read that one is actually going to be more than double the size of this one. Oh. So the one in Panton is going to be massive. And there's another one in Fairhaven. So I don't remember the exact time frame but I think once the permitting is resolved, they can get a solar farm installed pretty quickly. So don't be surprised to see a farm in Shaftesbury area on the horizon. And the one of the issues about it was that you will see it. It's not that far from State Highway 7. So it'll be pretty visible, and that was one of the major concerns.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, we're glad you're reporting on all of this. Kevin McCallum's a political reporter at 7 Days, and you can find the stories we were discussing today on 7daysvt.com. Kevin, thanks.
Thank you very much.
We're also joined by Peter Sterling, the executive director of the Clean Energy Trade Association, Renewable Energy Vermont. Peter, thank you so much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, that is all the time we have for today. As always, you can weigh in on our show. Pitch us ideas. Tell us what you liked or you didn't like by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Our show today was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer, and Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.